The hum of printers mixed with the low chatter of officers inside the Pearl Harbor Command Center. Folders stacked high, screens flickered with logistics data, and the smell of coffee and sea salt filled the air. A handful of officers stood near the front, introducing the new support staff to the operations team. Laughter rippled through the room as one lieutenant leaned to his buddy and muttered, "Just another paper pusher." The crowd chuckled, a few heads turning toward the woman standing quietly near the doorway. Petty Officer, First Class. Lauren Blake held a slim folder close to her chest. Her uniform was crisp but simple. No flashy insignia, no rows of medals. Just discipline in the way she stood. Her eyes stayed steady, her back straight, hands calm. Someone whispered loud enough for others to hear, "She's just a clerk, probably never seen the deck of a ship." Lauren didn't respond. Only a small nod, a faint, polite smile. From the corner, a commander smirked. "Hope she can handle more than a keyboard." The laughter returned, soft and dismissive. The camera drifts closer. Her name tag reads, B. Lake L. Her thumb brushes over a small ribbon pinned slightly crooked on her chest. The light catches on faint engraved letters, unreadable for now, but not for long. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Lauren Blake moved through Pearl Harbor headquarters like a quiet current, present, steady, but never demanding notice. She was 36, though the calm in her eyes made her seem older. To most, she was just another uniform behind a desk, a clerk reassigned after medical leave. To her, it was simpler. She was serving again, even if the world had forgotten how far she'd once gone for that right. She had joined the Navy at 18, back when the idea of salt air and purpose had meant everything. Logistics, personnel, supply, the unglamorous backbone of every operation. She'd been good at it. Too good, some said, for someone so quiet. Then one deployment changed everything. What happened out there wasn't discussed anymore. Officially, she'd been wounded in the line of duty. Unofficially, she came back with scars the Navy couldn't see. The transfer to administrative duty had seemed merciful on paper. In the office, her soft voice barely rose above the hum of keyboards. She greeted everyone by name, remembered birthdays, made coffee when the machine broke. She worked late without complaint, filed the impossible, fixed the mistakes others didn't notice. She carried herself with the discipline of someone who had once worn body armor instead of a badge holder. Her uniform was always regulation perfect, shoes polished, creases sharp enough to cut glass. "Morning, Blake," Lieutenant Connor Hale called one day, swaggering in with his usual loud grin. "Hope you're ready for another thrilling day of stapling glory." The room chuckled. Hale was the kind of officer who filled every silence. He called the desk team the Paper Battalion. His ambition was obvious, his ego even louder. Lauren just smiled. "Already loaded the stapler, sir." That quiet wit disarmed him for half a second, though he'd never admit it. To everyone else, she seemed harmless, the type who'd apologize if someone else bumped into her. But Chief Warrant Officer Perez, the old salt with 25 years of service, watched her more closely than the rest. Something about her calmness, the way she scanned rooms before entering, told him she wasn't as ordinary as she seemed. Perez noticed the way she walked, not like a civilian or even a base admin, but like someone still trained for patrol, eyes up, corners cleared, steps deliberate. When alarms rang for drills, her head turned first, body naturally finding cover before reason caught up, and there was that coin she always kept in her pocket. He'd seen her thumb it absently whenever tension rose. A habit, maybe, or memory. At ceremonies, when medals were pinned on others, she never joined the crowd. She stood at the back, hands clasped behind her, gaze fixed on the floor. The cheering, the applause, it made her uneasy. More than once, Perez thought he saw something like guilt flicker across her expression. One afternoon, a helicopter thundered low over the base. The sound sent papers fluttering across desks. Everyone looked up, half annoyed, half amused. Lauren froze. Her hand trembled just once before she caught herself. Perez saw it. She turned away, adjusting a stack of files that didn't need straightening. "Everything all right, Blake?" he asked quietly. She forced a small smile. "Just noise, Chief." He didn't press. That night, when most had left, Lauren remained at her desk, light from the monitor outlining the fatigue in her eyes. The building was silent, but for the distant hum of generators and the occasional call of the sea. She opened a drawer, revealing a small velvet box, old, scuffed, edges frayed. Inside lay a single Navy coin engraved with words nearly rubbed away, "Valor at Sea." She held it for a moment, thumb brushing the metal, before closing the box and locking it again. In the days that followed, Hale's jokes continued, harmless in tone, but heavy in repetition. "You ever been on a ship, Blake?" he asked one morning, tossing a ball of paper into her wastebasket. "Or do you just simulate the ocean with printer jams?" She looked up from her screen. "Both require navigation, sir." Even Perez smiled at that. But beneath her calm humor, there was distance, the kind that comes from knowing too much and saying too little. When Hale wasn't around, Perez sometimes sat beside her, trading stories. "You were in long before these kids, huh?" he said one evening. "Feels like another lifetime," she replied softly. "Where were you stationed back then?" She hesitated. "A few places." Then, with the faintest grin, "Mostly where I wasn't supposed to be." He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "That so?" She just nodded and went back to typing, ending the conversation without ending it. Perez leaned back, watching her work. There was something deliberate in every motion, a quiet efficiency learned from experience, not training. People came and went, new names rotated in and out of her roster, but Lauren remained. She never asked for recognition. She never told stories, yet every once in a while, when a young recruit walked by in a crisp new uniform, her eyes softened with something like pride. Or loss. Whatever had happened before, Pearl Harbor duty had left its mark, invisible but deep. She carried it with grace, hidden beneath paperwork, discipline, and silence. And though others saw a harmless clerk, Perez saw a storm held in place by sheer will, a woman who carried the weight of something she'd never say out loud. To most, she was background noise in a busy office. To those who looked closer, she was the calm before something none of them could yet see. The storm began with something as simple as a missing file. Pearl Harbor Command was tense that morning. The Admiral was due for inspection, and the entire operations team was scrambling. Charts littered tables, screens flickered with red-coded alerts, and tempers flared in every corner. Someone had misplaced the supply chain report, the one document that tied every requisition, shipment, and refueling schedule together. Without it, the inspection would collapse. Lieutenant Connor Hale barked orders from his desk like a man trying to command chaos into obedience. "Where's the damn report? It was signed off last night." He turned toward the nearest face. "Blake, you seen it?" Lauren glanced up from her terminal. It was routed through Logistics Section D at 2200 hours. "I can pull a backup from the manual registry," Hale scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "Don't bother, Blake. This isn't just typing. Real Navy work here." A few snickers followed from the younger officers. The phrase, "real Navy work," lingered like a sting. She said nothing. Just that quiet, steady tone. "Understood, sir." Perez, standing nearby, frowned slightly but said nothing. He'd learned to recognize dignity when he saw it, the kind that didn't need defending. For the next 20 minutes, Hale and his team tore through digital folders, shouting over one another, blaming corrupted files and network lag. Then, without a word, Lauren walked over to the archive console, entered a string of commands, none of them recognized, and printed the missing report. She walked past Hale's desk, placed it in front of him, and said simply, "Original copy, sir. Cross-verified against depot logs." Hale blinked. "Wait, how did you?" But before he could finish, the Admiral walked in. Hale straightened immediately, smile plastered on. "Sir, the report's ready. We've ensured full compliance." The Admiral nodded approvingly. "Good work, Lieutenant." Lauren stood a few feet away, silent, watching him take credit. Not a flicker of emotion crossed her face. After the inspection, Hale clapped her on the shoulder. "Nice assist, Blake. You might make yourself useful after all." Happy to help, sir. That was the first time Perez saw it clearly, the balance between pride and restraint. She could have humiliated Hale in front of the Admiral, but she didn't. She didn't need to. Over the next few days, the teasing became routine. Always just enough to sting, never enough to draw formal reprimand. Guess the coffee machine's your battlefield, huh, Blake? Hale joked one morning as she fixed the communal brewer. Bet she's never left the air conditioning, another officer laughed. Someone else added, maybe she got that ribbon for filing under pressure. Each comment drew a ripple of laughter. Lauren remained unshaken. She'd nod, sometimes even smile. But her silence spoke louder than any comeback. Perez noticed everything, the way her eyes stayed aware, constantly mapping exits, how she never sat with her back to the door, how her uniform creases were always perfect, ironed the same way special operations teams did to minimize visual signature. She wasn't performing discipline, it was muscle memory. He'd seen soldiers like that before. The ones who'd lived through things they'd never speak of. One evening, the office emptied out for dinner. Hale and the younger officers crowded the break room, loud and carefree. Perez stayed behind, pretending to review files, but really just watching Lauren work. She moved methodically, filing documents by hand, checking details that no one else bothered with. Her movements were so precise, they were almost rhythmic. Left-hand brace, right-hand file, eyes flick, then double-check. "Where'd you serve before clerical?" Perez finally asked, voice casual. She paused for half a heartbeat, then smiled softly. "Just here and there." Hale's voice came from the doorway before Perez could reply. "Yeah, probably at the front desk of HR." The room erupted with laughter. Perez didn't. He just studied her. That stillness again, controlled but not passive. She looked up slowly, meeting Hale's eyes for the first time. "You done, sir?" The laughter faltered, just slightly. Hale smirked. "Don't take it personal, Blake. We joke around here, builds morale." She gave a small nod. "Of course, wouldn't want to interrupt morale." Perez nearly smiled. Hale didn't realize how close he'd come to being measured, not insulted. The tension drifted, but didn't disappear. It became the undercurrent of every day. Small slights, harmless jokes, the quiet testing of someone's limits. Lauren never gave them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She worked through it all with the same unbending calm. Some began to think she didn't feel anything. Others, that she was too proud to react. Both were wrong. Perez once caught her in the hallway after hours, staring at the flag outside the window. The night wind rippled through it, and for a moment her face looked heavier than usual, burdened not by sadness, but by memory. "You okay, Blake?" he asked. She didn't look away from the flag. "Some people fight wars," she said quietly. "Others just carry them longer." Perez said nothing. He didn't have to. He knew that tone, the sound of someone remembering names she'd never say aloud again. The following week, an error in the logistics manifest triggered another wave of chaos. Hale stormed into the room, red-faced. "Who signed off on this fuel discrepancy? We're off by 500 gallons." Everyone turned to their screens, searching frantically. Lauren opened the file calmly, cross-referenced 2 codes, and said, "The errors in the autofill algorithm, sir. The supply data from Dock 9 didn't sync due to a corrupted log." Hale glared. "And how would you even know that?" She pointed to the source ID. "Because that code belongs to the Pacific Depot Protocol, sir. And it hasn't been used since Ghost Tide operations." Perez's head snapped up. Ghost Tide. That name wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Classified. Buried. Hale snorted. "Hale." "Yeah, sure, Ghost, whatever. Sounds like a movie." He turned to his team. "Fix it, people." But Perez didn't move. He kept looking at Lauren, who immediately bent her head back to work. That night, after the others left, he lingered. "You were there, weren't you?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer, just logged out of her console and gathered her things. "Chief," she said softly, "some files are better left closed." He watched her walk out into the rain-slick corridor, her boots clicking softly against the tile. For the first time, he realized that her silence wasn't protection from ridicule. It was survival. Over the next few weeks, Perez began subtly defending her when the jokes got too sharp. Hale noticed. "Careful, Chief," Hale said one afternoon, half grinning. "You'll make the clerk think she's special." Perez didn't smile. "She doesn't need me to tell her what she is." "Yeah? And what's that?" Perez looked him dead in the eye. "A sailor who's seen more than you ever will." The laughter that followed was uneasy. Lauren, from her desk, kept typing, expression calm, but her hands paused for the briefest moment. She'd heard every word. Later, when the room was empty again, she whispered to herself, "I'm not here to be seen." The ceiling fan hummed softly. The only sound that followed was the faint metallic click of the coin in her pocket, turning once, twice before she put it away again. Days blurred into each other, same desks, same chatter, same small humiliations. Yet under it all, something was shifting. Perez's respect deepened, Hale's arrogance sharpened. And Lauren's patience, that endless, quiet patience, started to look less like submission and more like a waiting storm. The narrator's voice cuts through the silence. "What would you have done if you were her? Stay silent, or remind them who you once were." Lauren Blake didn't need to remind anyone. She'd already decided some lessons, she thought, teach themselves. She just waited for the moment when the truth would stop needing words. And that moment was coming. The sky over Pearl Harbor had turned an uneasy gray that morning, thick clouds rolling in from the Pacific, the kind that carried both rain and memories. Inside the command center, officers crowded around a holographic table displaying routes, weather patterns, and schedules for the upcoming joint naval exercise. It wasn't a real operation, at least not on paper. But everyone knew these exercises were where real reputations were made. Commanders reviewed deployment lists, technicians prepared live feeds, and at the far end of the room, Petty Officer First Class Lauren Blake sat quietly, updating the personnel rosters. Her hands moved across the console with quiet precision. Unlike the others, she didn't need to double-check codes or confirm authorizations. She typed fluidly, naturally, almost too efficiently. Perez leaned over her shoulder, curiosity piqued. "You adjusting the rosters manually?" "Yes, Chief," she said, eyes on the screen. "Auto syncs off again." "Easier to patch it by hand." He frowned. "By hand?" "That's a classified registry." Without missing a beat, she entered a new access string, LV4, PAC. The monitor flickered green, granting entry. Perez blinked. "You have level 4 clearance?" he asked, voice low. Lauren's fingers paused over the keyboard. She looked up, face calm, eyes unreadable. "Old habit," she replied simply. Perez stared at her for a moment. "Level 4 clearances aren't habits, Blake. They're ghosts." She didn't answer. Just finished typing, hit save, and logged out. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the ocean. The storm was coming sooner than expected. That night, the wind hit like a freight train. Power flickered throughout the compound. Emergency lights kicked in, painting the hallways in red. Files rattled on shelves, and someone shouted over the gusts, "Secure everything!" Perez and Hale were both on lead duty. They found Lauren alone in the logistics room, securing stacks of sealed containers. "Blake, what the hell are you still doing here?" Hale barked. "That storm's pushing 40 knots. Finishing the transfer," she replied. Perez moved closer. "Leave it. The system will hold till morning." She looked up at him, calm as always. "If it fails, the exercise will lose all personnel tracking. Better I finish it." The power surged, lights flickered, and the old steel cabinet beside her shuddered violently before toppling over. Hale cursed and jumped back as files and containers crashed to the floor. "Damn it, watch it!" Lauren instinctively reached forward to steady the falling boxes, not with panic, but trained reflex. The clang of metal filled the room, followed by one distinct, smaller sound, a single clink, sharp and metallic, bouncing across the tile. Perez froze. Slowly, he bent down, brushing aside papers and cables until his hand found it, a circular piece of polished metal, worn at the edges. He turned it over. The engraving caught the faint emergency light. "Valor at Sea, Operation Ghost Tide. He felt his breath stop. Ghost Tide wasn't supposed to exist. The Navy had buried that name years ago, a Black Ops recovery mission in hostile waters, classified beyond top secret. He remembered the whispers. A crippled destroyer, a night extraction, dozens rescued under impossible conditions. But everyone involved was listed as redacted. Perez straightened, medal in hand, and met Lauren's gaze. She stood still, calm but silent, the look of someone who'd already seen the reaction before. He held the medal out slowly. You were there?" Her voice barely rose above the hum of the generators. "Please, Chief." "Don't." Perez hesitated, then nodded. He handed it back without another word. Lauren took it gently, wiped the edge with her sleeve, and placed it into the pocket of her uniform. "Some things are better left where they belong," she said softly. Before Perez could reply, Hale's voice cut through the moment, sharp and dismissive. Well. Didn't realize the clerk collects souvenirs." He laughed, the kind of laugh that fills silence with ignorance. "Hey, Blake, maybe one day you'll earn a real medal." Perez turned toward him. "Watch it, Lieutenant." But Lauren didn't need defending. She looked up, her eyes catching the dim light, steady, cold, cutting through the noise. The sound in the room changed. Even the hum of the storm seemed to pause. For just half a second, the air froze. Hale's grin faltered. Something in her stare, the way she held it, without blinking, without fear, made him take half a step back. She finally spoke, quiet and measured. "You should be careful, sir. Some medals aren't earned. They're survived." Hale's mouth opened, then closed again. No one laughed this time. Perez felt a chill crawl up his spine. That was it. That tone. That stillness. He'd heard it before, on the deck of a sinking ship 20 years ago, in the voice of a medic giving orders while the world burned around her. Lauren broke the gaze first, returning to her work. "We should finish securing the data, gentlemen. Storm's not over yet." No one argued. By morning, the winds calmed, but something in the office had shifted. Hale avoided her eyes. Perez said nothing, though every time he saw her, his mind replayed the words on that medal. He went home that night and looked up what little was declassified about Ghost Tide. Almost everything was blacked out. But one line remained in the report's introduction. Surviving officer led 57 sailors to safety under enemy fire. Name withheld by request. Perez leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Name withheld," he murmured. Of course it was. The next day, Lauren arrived early as usual, uniform pressed, coffee steaming beside her terminal. She worked as if nothing had happened. Hale entered the room later, still trying to regain his confidence. He made one last attempt to save face. "Morning, Clerk Blake," he said, forcing a grin. "How's that collection of yours? You get that from the souvenir shop?" Perez froze. He could see it building again. That subtle shift in the room, like air pressure dropping before a storm. Lauren looked up. No smile this time. No polite nod. Just calm, deliberate silence. Then she said softly, "No, sir, they don't sell those where I got it." The tone wasn't angry. It wasn't proud. It was a warning, quiet and absolute. The room went silent. Every head turned, every laugh caught halfway. Hale tried to respond, but nothing came. Perez knew it then. The woman sitting at that desk wasn't just the clerk. She was someone who had once carried lives through fire and storm, someone who'd seen the edge of the sea and come back changed. He didn't need proof. He'd seen enough. Lauren went back to typing, the medal once again tucked away in her pocket, her eyes calm. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly again, distant now, but steady, as if the ocean itself remembered her name. The sky over Pearl Harbor had turned an uneasy gray that morning, thick clouds rolling in from the Pacific, the kind that carried both rain and memories. Inside the command center, officers crowded around a holographic table displaying routes, weather patterns, and schedules for the upcoming joint naval exercise. It wasn't a real operation, at least not on paper, but everyone knew these exercises were where real reputations were made. Commanders reviewed deployment lists. Technicians prepared live feeds, and at the far end of the room, Petty Officer First Class Lauren Blake sat quietly, updating the personnel rosters. Her hands moved across the console with quiet precision. Unlike the others, she didn't need to double-check codes or confirm authorizations. She typed fluidly, naturally, almost too efficiently. Perez leaned over her shoulder, curiosity piqued. "You adjusting the rosters manually?" "Yes, Chief," she said, eyes on the screen. "Auto syncs off again. Easier to patch it by hand." He frowned. "By hand? That's a classified registry." Without missing a beat, she entered a new access string, LV4 PAC. The monitor flickered green, granting entry. Perez blinked. "You have level 4 clearance?" he asked, voice low. Lauren's fingers paused over the keyboard. She looked up, face calm, eyes unreadable. "Old habit," she replied simply. Perez stared at her for a moment. "Level 4 clearances aren't habits, Blake. They're ghosts." She didn't answer, just finished typing, hit save, and logged out. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the ocean. The storm was coming sooner than expected. That night, the wind hit like a freight train. Power flickered throughout the compound. Emergency lights kicked in, painting the hallways in red. Files rattled on shelves, and someone shouted over the gusts, "Secure everything!" Perez and Hale were both on late duty. They found Lauren alone in the logistics room, securing stacks of sealed containers. "Blake, what the hell are you still doing here?" Hale barked. "That storm's pushing 40 knots. "Finishing the transfer," she replied. Perez moved closer. "Leave it. The system will hold till morning." She looked up at him, calm as always. "If it fails, the exercise will lose all personnel tracking." "Better I finish it." The power surged, lights flickered, and the old steel cabinet beside her shuddered violently before toppling over. Hale cursed and jumped back as files and containers crashed to the floor. "Damn it, watch it." Lauren instinctively reached forward to steady the falling boxes, not with panic, but trained reflex. The clang of metal filled the room, followed by one distinct, smaller sound, a single clink, sharp and metallic, bouncing across the tile. Perez froze. Slowly, he bent down, brushing aside papers and cables until his hand found it, a circular piece of polished metal, worn at the edges. He turned it over. The engraving caught the faint emergency light. "Valor at Sea, Operation Ghost Tide." He felt his breath stop. Ghost Tide wasn't supposed to exist. The Navy had buried that name years ago, a Black Ops recovery mission in hostile waters, classified beyond top secret. He remembered the whispers. A crippled destroyer, a night extraction, dozens rescued under impossible conditions. But everyone involved was listed as redacted. Perez straightened, metal in hand, and met Lauren's gaze. She stood still, calm but silent, the look of someone who'd already seen the reaction before. He held the metal out slowly. You were there?" Her voice barely rose above the hum of the generators. "Please, Chief, don't." Perez hesitated, then nodded. He handed it back without another word. Lauren took it gently, wiped the edge with her sleeve, and placed it into the pocket of her uniform. "Some things are better left where they belong," she said softly. Before Perez could reply, Hale's voice cut through the moment, sharp and dismissive. Well, didn't realize the clerk collects souvenirs." He laughed, the kind of laugh that fills silence with ignorance. "Hey, Blake, maybe one day you'll earn a real medal." Perez turned toward him. "Watch it, Lieutenant." But Lauren didn't need defending. She looked up, her eyes catching the dim light, steady, cold, cutting through the noise. The sound in the room changed, even the hum of the storm seemed to pause. For just half a second, the air froze. Hale's grin faltered. Something in her stare, the way she held it, without blinking, without fear, made him take half a step back. She finally spoke, quiet and measured. "You should be careful, sir. Some medals aren't earned, they're survived." Hale's mouth opened, then closed again. No one laughed this time. Perez felt a chill crawl up his spine. That was it. That tone, that stillness. He'd heard it before, on the deck of a sinking ship 20 years ago, in the voice of a medic giving orders while the world burned around her. Lauren broke the gaze first, returning to her work. We should finish securing the data, gentlemen. Storm's not over yet. No one argued. By morning, the winds calmed, but something in the office had shifted. Hale avoided her eyes. Perez said nothing, though every time he saw her, his mind replayed the words on that metal. He went home that night and looked up what little was declassified about Ghost Tide. Almost everything was blacked out. But one line remained in the report's introduction. Surviving officer led 57 sailors to safety under enemy fire. Name withheld by request. Perez leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Name withheld, he murmured. Of course it was. The next day, Lauren arrived early as usual, uniform pressed, coffee steaming beside her terminal. She worked as if nothing had happened. Hale entered the room later, still trying to regain his confidence. He made one last attempt to save face. "Morning, Clerk Blake," he said, forcing a grin. "How's that collection of yours? You get that from the souvenir shop?" Perez froze. He could see it building again, that subtle shift in the room, like air pressure dropping before a storm. Lauren looked up. No smile this time, no polite nod. Just calm, deliberate silence. Then she said softly, "No, sir. They don't sell those where I got it." The tone wasn't angry. It wasn't proud. It was a warning, quiet and absolute. The room went silent. Every head turned, every laugh caught halfway. Hale tried to respond, but nothing came. Perez knew it then. The woman sitting at that desk wasn't just the clerk. She was someone who had once carried lives through fire and storm, someone who'd seen the edge of the sea and come back changed. He didn't need proof. He'd seen enough. Lauren went back to typing, the metal once again tucked away in her pocket, her eyes calm. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly again, distant now, but steady, as if the ocean itself remembered her name. The storm had passed, but the aftermath left the entire base uneasy. Salt hung in the air, cables lay scattered across the pier, and the metallic groan of ships rocked by the night's surge echoed through the harbor. The USS Spokane, one of the fleet's communications and systems vessels, sat moored at Dock 6, its lights flickering weakly against the gray morning. At first, no one noticed the silence on its deck. Then the radios went dead. Inside the operations center, the tension was palpable. The commander stood near the console, his voice sharp. "We've lost contact with the Spokane. They're reporting complete system failure. No comms, no digital control, nothing. Power relays are fried." Lieutenant Hale was already pacing, rubbing his temples. Must have been surge damage from last night's storm. "Just reboot the systems." "We tried," an ensign replied nervously. "Their digital overrides are locked. No access through standard protocol." The commander slammed a fist against the table. "We need manual override protocols. Who even knows how to do this anymore?" Silence. The room filled with static and helpless glances. A younger officer whispered, "Those systems are pre-09 vintage. No one's trained on them anymore." Perez shifted uneasily. He'd seen that model before, the kind of ship whose failsafes could only be reactivated through hardline command entry, a process buried under decades of updates. Then, from the back of the room, a quiet voice broke through the noise. "I can, sir." Heads turned. Lauren Blake stood near the doorway, clipboard still in hand, uniform slightly rumpled from a long night of storm duty. Her tone wasn't tentative, it was matter-of-fact. Hale laughed, incredulous. You're just a clerk." The commander looked between them. "You know the Spokane's manual systems?" Lauren nodded. "If the analog panels are still intact, I can bring them online." "I've worked that model before," Hale snorted. "Doing what?" "Filing its maintenance reports?" Before anyone could react, the door at the far end opened. Rear Admiral Jeffries, tall, silver-haired, and unmistakably in charge, entered with a brisk stride. "What's the situation?" The commander turned quickly. "Sir, the Spokane's gone dark. No access through primary systems." "We're dead in the water." Jeffries' eyes swept the room. "Options?" Before anyone else spoke, Lauren repeated calmly, "I can do it, Admiral." The Admiral's brow furrowed. "You?" Yes, sir. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint buzz of dead monitors. Then Jeffries gave a short nod. Let her try. Hale's smirk vanished. Sir, with respect. That's an order, Lieutenant, the Admiral said flatly. Lauren didn't wait for anyone's approval. She picked up a field tablet, slung it under her arm, and walked briskly toward the exit. Perez followed without being told. The walk to the dock was quiet except for the rainwater dripping from the awnings. When they reached the gangway, crewmen rushed to meet them. Ma'am, everything's out, even the emergency relays. Lauren's eyes scanned the panels as she stepped aboard. Generator status? Nominal. But the bridge console's unresponsive. She nodded. Then we'll start from the engineering bay. Perez leaned close, whispering, You've done this before. Something like it, she murmured. Inside the dim corridors of the Spokane, the air smelled of ozone and machine oil. Flashlights cut through the darkness as she descended the ladder to the control deck. Every step she took echoed off the steel. Clank, clank, boots, steady, deliberate, familiar. They reached the main relay terminal, a nest of switches, wires, and analog meters that looked like it belonged in a museum. Hale, standing behind her, crossed his arms. I don't see how you plan to fix a system that hasn't been used since I was in high school. Lauren ignored him. She knelt by the access panel, removed her gloves, and began unscrewing the rusted bolts. Her movements were efficient, mechanical, not guessing, not checking, knowing. Perez watched silently, recognition dawning. She wasn't fumbling, she was remembering. Within minutes, she'd opened the core panel, exposing the power bus and emergency relay nodes. She reached for a bypass cable from the toolkit and connected it between two specific ports. Sparks hissed. Careful, Hale barked. Lauren didn't flinch, stabilizing the feedback line. Her fingers danced across the circuit board, tracing routes faster than any technician could follow. If we can route power through the analog backup, we'll regain local control. The commander leaned in. That system's encrypted. She looked up, calm. Not anymore. With a few deliberate keystrokes, she entered a code. 6 digits, pause, then 3 letters. The screen blinked. Authorization. Override acetate. Someone behind her whispered, That's Ghost Protocol access. Perez's chest tightened. He knew that phrase. An emergency override reserved for special recovery operations sealed decades ago. Hale stammered, No way, that's not even supposed to exist anymore. Lauren continued working. She didn't respond. When the last connection clicked into place, the control terminal flickered back to life. The hum of power returned, lights slowly coming online, monitors glowing blue across the bridge. Crewmen gasped as systems reconnected to the harbor network. Lauren stood, wiped her hands, and turned toward the Admiral who had been watching silently from the doorway. She saluted sharply. Manual integrity restored, sir. Communications and command channels are online. For a long moment, Jeffrey said nothing. Then he stepped closer, studying her, as if trying to reconcile the face before him with a name he hadn't spoken in years. Blake, where'd you learn that procedure? She hesitated. Classified, sir. Hale's jaw dropped. Classified? The Admiral's eyes narrowed slightly, but there was a glimmer there, something between disbelief and respect. Not many know Ghost Protocol operations. She met his gaze evenly. It's been a while, Admiral. Behind them, Perez stood with his arms crossed, quiet pride in his expression. He pieced it together now, all the subtle clues, the precision, the metal. The Admiral gave a slow nod. You saved us a lot of embarrassment today, Petty Officer. Just doing my job, sir. Hale's face burned red. He looked like a man watching his own arrogance unravel. You're telling me she, the Admiral cut him off. You'd do well to learn from her, Lieutenant. Hale fell silent. The crew worked to stabilize the remaining systems, guided by the reawakened power grid. Lauren walked the length of the deck, checking instruments, issuing quiet instructions to the technicians. Each command efficient, precise. It was as if she'd never left this world. Perez followed a few steps behind, keeping his voice low. Ghost-tide, wasn't it? Her hand paused on the railing. She turned slightly, eyes distant. That name doesn't exist anymore, he nodded. Right. and neither does Ghost Protocol. A faint smile tugged at her lips, weary, but real. Then let's keep it that way. By the time they returned to the operations center, the storm clouds had broken, letting sunlight spill across the base. The Spokane's systems pinged back online one by one. The crisis had passed. Officers turned to watch as Lauren entered, boots still echoing softly against the tile. She stood before the Admiral once more, posture straight. "Manual systems fully restored, sir. Diagnostics running clean." Jeffries regarded her for a moment, then said quietly, "You've been hiding in plain sight, haven't you?" She didn't answer. Just gave a respectful nod. He returned the gesture. "Dismissed, petty officer." She saluted, turned, and walked away. Perez lingered behind, catching Hale's eye as he passed. The younger officer's expression was pale, shaken, his mockery now replaced by shame. Perez gave a slight shrug. "Told you, son, not all wars are fought in daylight." As Lauren disappeared down the corridor, the Admiral leaned toward the commander. Ghost Tide survivors were all listed as retired or deceased. "How long's she been here?" The commander checked the roster. 3 years, sir. Administrative reassignment from Special Ops Logistics." The Admiral exhaled slowly, a touch of reverence in his voice. "Unbelievable." Perez didn't hear the rest. He was already walking out into the bright morning, the rhythmic clang of ship metal echoing faintly across the water. He found Lauren outside, standing at the edge of the dock, the breeze lifting loose strands of her hair. "Not bad for a clerk," he said softly. She smiled faintly without looking at him. "Don't tell anyone." "I've got a reputation to maintain." Perez chuckled, but his eyes were serious. "You ever gonna tell them who you really are?" She glanced at the water, eyes reflecting the pale light. "Doesn't matter anymore. The ones who need to know already do." And with that, she turned back toward headquarters. Posture steady, steps measured, boots echoing down the dock like a soldier who never stopped marching. Behind her, the Spokane came fully alive, its radar spinning once again, a symbol of what everyone there would soon realize: that the quietest person in the room had just saved the entire fleet from humiliation. Perez watched her go, whispering under his breath, "Ghost Tide lives." And somewhere, deep in the classified files of Naval Command, a name long buried in black ink would soon draw attention again: Lieutenant Commander Lauren Blake. The next morning dawned clear and unnervingly calm, the kind of quiet that followed a storm but carried its memory in the air. Sunlight bounced off the wet pavement of Pearl Harbor, glinting across the flags lined up outside headquarters. Inside the main hall, sailors and officers stood at attention, their uniforms pressed, boots shining, the scent of starch and polish filling the room. It was inspection day. Rear Admiral Jeffries stood on the dais, hands clasped behind his back, as aides handed him the morning personnel files. His voice carried across the hall, crisp and commanding. "Yesterday's storm tested this base in more ways than one. I'm proud of how this team performed under pressure." He began reading names, commending departments for their readiness, praising officers for quick action. Hale stood near the front, shoulders squared, trying to look confident, despite the shadow that had fallen over him since the incident aboard the Spokane. Perez stood in the second row, eyes occasionally flicking toward the back of the room where Lauren Blake stood quietly among the enlisted staff. Her uniform looked as it always did, immaculate, unassuming, precise. But there was something different about her presence that morning. Not pride, not anticipation. Just stillness. The Admiral's voice continued through the roster. "Lieutenant Connor Hale, commendation for systems coordination during storm recovery." A light ripple of applause. Hale nodded stiffly, glancing sideways, perhaps hoping his performance had redeemed him. Then Jeffries turned the next page. Petty Officer First Class, Lauren Blake. He stopped. The hall grew still. The Admiral frowned slightly, scanning the document again. Then his eyes lifted toward her. "Blake," he said slowly, voice changing tone. "As in Lieutenant Commander Lauren Blake, recipient of the Navy Cross?" The room froze. Perez felt every muscle in the hall tighten at once. Hale's face drained of color, the smirk he wore out of habit collapsing into disbelief. Jeffries took a step forward, holding the folder open, his eyes locked on her. "You led the rescue at Ghost Tide, didn't you? 57 sailors brought home alive under fire." A whisper rippled through the ranks. That name again. Ghost Tide. For years, it had been the subject of rumors whispered in mess halls, a classified mission few believed had ever truly happened. Lauren didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed ahead. "Sir," she said softly, "I was part of a team." The Admiral shook his head. "You led it." His voice wasn't angry, it carried awe. Respect. A weight that silenced the room deeper than any order could. Every officer's gaze turned toward her, their minds piecing together the fragments, the metal, the clearance codes, the composure, the precision. The woman they'd laughed at, the one they'd mocked as just a clerk, was the officer whose name had been struck from record to protect others. Perez felt something stir in his chest, pride mixed with quiet vindication. He straightened his back and saluted. The sound was sharp, echoing through the still air. One by one, others followed. First the enlisted sailors, then the officers, then even the young ensigns who had once smirked at her calmness. Boots shifted, heels clicked. In perfect, synchronized silence, the hall rose to attention. Even Hale hesitated only a second before lifting his hand, his eyes fixed on the floor, shame burning deep. Lauren's gaze didn't waver. She returned the salute, slow and steady, her expression unreadable. Jeffries stepped down from the dais, his medals glinting faintly under the lights. When he reached her, he looked at her not as a superior officer addressing a subordinate, but as one warrior recognizing another. "I've read that report a dozen times," he said quietly. "Never thought I'd meet the woman behind it." She said nothing. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It carried the weight of memory, of lives saved and names lost. He extended his hand. "It's an honor, Commander." Lauren hesitated for just a second, then took it. "I'm just Petty Officer Blake now, sir." Jeffries gave a faint smile. "Not anymore, you're not." But she shook her head gently. "I requested that rank for a reason." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then we'll honor it, your way." Perez swallowed hard, emotion tightening in his throat. For the first time, the hall didn't feel like an office or an inspection ground. It felt like sacred ground, a place where truth finally stood uncovered. Jeffries turned back to address the room. "There are those who serve in the spotlight," he said, his voice firm. "And there are those who serve in silence, whose courage is known only by those who lived because of it." He gestured toward her. "Petty Officer Blake belongs to the second kind." No one dared to speak. The only sound was the slow, rhythmic flutter of the flags outside, the breeze finding its way through the open windows. Hale lowered his salute last. His voice, when it came, was quiet. "Ma'am, I didn't know." Lauren looked at him, not with anger, not even pity. Just understanding. "Now you do." He nodded, eyes down. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. Perez's voice came softly from the side. "Welcome back, ma'am." She gave him a faint smile. "Never left, Chief." The Admiral motioned to her once more. "Blake, report to my office after the ceremony." "Yes, sir." As he turned back toward the dais, the formation remained motionless, the room still in silent awe. Every officer present would carry this memory for the rest of their careers. The story of the clerk would spread, but not as gossip, as reverence. And somewhere in the crowd, a young recruit whispered to another, "That's her, the one from Ghost Tide." Perez heard it, and this time he smiled. When the ceremony ended, Lauren remained at attention for one final moment, the sunlight catching the faint outline of the metal beneath her uniform. Then she exhaled softly, not relief, but quiet acceptance, and walked away, leaving behind a silence that felt almost holy. The hall had grown impossibly still. The hum of air vents and the shuffle of boots had faded into something sacred, that kind of silence that only comes when the truth finally surfaces after years of being buried. The Admiral descended the steps from the dais, medals on his chest catching stray beams of morning light. Each step he took seemed to echo against the marble floor, deliberate, slow, the sound of history closing the distance between what was forgotten and what could no longer stay hidden. He stopped in front of her. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He just looked at her, not the uniform, not the ribbons, not the rank, but her. "I read that report a dozen times," he said finally, voice quieter now. "Never thought I'd meet the woman behind it." Lauren stood tall, hands at her sides, eyes forward. "I didn't do it alone, sir." He gave a small, knowing smile. "That's what every real hero says." Reaching slowly into his coat, the Admiral pulled something from the inner pocket, a small, weathered medal. It gleamed faintly under the overhead lights, edges worn, ribbon faded with time. The one she had lost during the storm. "You left this in your file," he said softly, almost to himself. "Years ago." For a heartbeat, she couldn't move. That medal had been buried with everything she had tried to forget. The faces, the chaos, the night when everything she knew about war and duty had changed. Jeffries stepped closer. Permission to restore what was never properly honored. Her throat tightened, but she nodded once. "Permission granted, sir." With steady hands, he reached out and pinned the medal to her uniform. The medal clicked softly as it settled against her chest, a sound so small, yet it seemed to carry through the entire hall. When he stepped back, his voice broke slightly. "The nation owes you more than paperwork, Petty Officer Blake." "Far more." The words hung in the air like a flag unfurling. Around them, officers stood motionless, eyes fixed on the quiet woman who had once filed their reports, fetched their documents, and sat behind a desk no one looked twice at. The same woman who had once led 57 sailors through fire and storm and never once asked for recognition. Perez stood ramrod straight, chest swelling with pride he didn't bother to hide. He'd known there was something about her from the start, that calm, that poise. Now he understood. Slowly, the Admiral turned toward the formation. "Gentlemen," he said, voice commanding but thick with emotion, "you are in the presence of one of this Navy's finest." It started with Perez. He raised his hand in salute, sharp and proud. Then, one by one, the others followed. Officers, sailors, even clerks, every rank, every corner of the room. The collective sound of heels clicking, arms rising, and breaths holding filled the space like a tide. The hall stood united in reverent silence. Even Lieutenant Hale, standing at the edge of the formation, took a long, trembling breath before stepping forward. His voice came low, unsteady. "Ma'am, I didn't know." Lauren's gaze softened. She looked at him, not with triumph, not with resentment, but understanding. The kind of understanding that comes from knowing how easy it is to judge what you don't see. "Now you do," she said simply. He nodded once, eyes lowering in respect. The Admiral turned toward her again, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. The narrator's voice would later capture the stillness of that moment, that wordless exchange between duty and recognition. No words. No music, just silence, the kind that carries respect deeper than any applause. Lauren lifted her right hand slowly, returning the salute. Her posture never wavered, her expression calm but resolute. Around her, every officer held their salute a little longer, unwilling to break the spell. For the first time in years, she allowed herself a small breath. Not pride, not relief, just peace. The sunlight streaming through the window caught the edge of her newly pinned medal. It shimmered faintly against the crisp navy blue of her uniform, not as a decoration but as a reminder. When the Admiral finally lowered his salute, the others followed in perfect unison. The sound of dozens of hands dropping in sync echoed through the room like a heartbeat. Jeffries gave her one final nod. "Welcome home, Commander," he said quietly. She met his gaze, her voice steady. "I never left, sir." And with that, she turned, eyes forward, the medal resting where it always belonged, not as proof of what she'd done, but of who she'd always been. In the stillness that followed, not a single person moved. Not a single soul dared to speak, because sometimes the loudest sound in the world is respect. Evening settled softly over Pearl Harbor. The last rays of sun glowed against the horizon, painting the docks in gold and amber light. The storm had passed, the ceremony was over, and the base had returned to its steady rhythm, the kind of quiet that only comes after something sacred has happened. Inside the operations office, the hum of computers and the faint tapping of keys filled the still air. Lauren Blake sat at her small desk, the same one she'd used every day for years. No spotlight, no crowd, no ceremony. Just her, a screen full of deployment orders, and the faint scent of coffee lingering in the air. Her newly reattached medal caught the light occasionally as she typed, the ribbon straight, the metal burnished from years of wear. It didn't shine to demand attention. It just existed, quietly, like her. The door creaked open. Chief Warrant Officer Perez stepped in, carrying 2 steaming mugs. He set one beside her without a word. "Don't suppose you'll tell us the rest of that story?" he asked with a half-smile. Lauren paused her typing. Her fingers lingered above the keys, then slowly lowered. She looked at the coffee, then at him. "Some stories aren't mine anymore," she said softly. "They belong to the ones who didn't come back." Perez nodded. "Fair enough." He took a slow sip, eyes drifting to the medal on her chest. "Still, it's good to see it where it belongs." She smiled faintly, that calm, knowing kind of smile that came from years of carrying silence. "I didn't do it for medals, Chief." "I know," he said quietly. "That's what makes it matter." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The low hum of the base outside filtered through the window, distant laughter, footsteps, the sound of waves brushing against the docks. Lauren leaned back slightly, eyes distant. "You know," she said, "people think when you leave the fight, it's over. But sometimes the hardest part is coming back, learning how to serve in quiet ways." Perez studied her face, the calm strength behind her eyes, the way she carried both loss and purpose like old companions. "You're still serving," he said. She looked down at the screen, at the names of sailors she'd never met, but now helped deploy. "Maybe that's the point," she murmured. "Service doesn't stop just because the uniform changes." The camera lingered on her desk, the half-filled coffee cup, the soft reflection of the metal in the glass of the monitor, the rhythm of her typing steady and deliberate. The narrator's voice softened, carrying a reverent tone, as if the words themselves bowed to her story. She didn't come back for praise or promotion. She came back to serve again, even if it meant no one would remember her name. Outside the window, the flags along the pier moved gently in the evening wind. One by one, the base lights flickered on, illuminating the rows of ships resting against the calm harbor. Perez stood, gathering his empty mug. "You know, Blake," he said, turning toward the door, "the young ones will talk about today for years. You might have just changed how they see service." She didn't look up. "Then that's enough," she said quietly. "If they remember the lesson, not the name, that's enough." He lingered a moment, nodded once, and left her in peace. The room returned to silence, except for the steady tap of keys and the distant heartbeat of the harbor. The camera slowly panned closer, the metal gleaming faintly under the desk lamp, her hands working with the same calm precision that had once steered sailors through chaos. "Because heroes don't always wear new uniforms," the narrator continued softly. "Sometimes they're the ones fixing the forms, training the next, and keeping the Navy's heart beating quietly behind every mission." Lauren stopped typing for a moment. Her eyes drifted to a framed photo pinned beside her monitor, a faded shot of the Spokane crew, long before any of them knew the meaning of Ghost Tide. She reached out and straightened it gently, her expression unreadable but full of meaning. Then she turned back to her work, fingers finding their rhythm again. Outside, the sea shimmered beneath the last light of dusk. And in that quiet office, away from ceremony, away from rank, away from the noise, Petty Officer Lauren Blake continued her duty, the only way she knew how, quietly, faithfully, and with a strength no one could ever truly measure. The screen faded to black, and the final words lingered, carried by the narrator's solemn tone. "Not all heroes fight to be seen. Some just keep the world running, one quiet act of service at a time." From the battlefields of Ghost Tide to the quiet desks of Pearl Harbor, Petty Officer Lauren Blake proved that valor doesn't retire. It doesn't fade with medals or fade with time. It adapts, finding new ways to serve, to protect, and to lead, even when the world stops noticing. She showed us that true courage isn't always loud or seen under bright lights. Sometimes, it's found in silence, in the steady hands of those who keep the mission alive long after the headlines are gone. Heroes like Lauren remind us that service doesn't end when the uniform changes. It continues, quietly, faithfully, through every task, every name typed, every life still touched by duty. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These stories keep the courage alive for generations to come.